Welcome back to Harbor. In a magazine interview, it was the Weekly Standard, Governor Haley Barbour of Mississippi remembered some good those old white citizens councils did back during civil rights days. Today he called those groups something very different. He said they were totally indefensible. Well, Democratic Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi and Melissa Harris Perry is joining us right now. She's an MSNBC contributor and, of course, a Princeton professor of politics and African American studies. Congressman, I want to give you the full opportunity to talk about the governor right now, but I want to, first of all, give you a big quote from him before. This is what he said in that Weekly Standard interview that got him into all this mess. Governor Haley Barbour talks about why school integration in his hometown of Wazoo happened without violence. He said in that article, quote, because the business community wouldn't stand for it. You heard of the citizens councils. Up north, they think it was like the KKK. Where I come from, it was an organization of town leaders. In Wazoo City, they passed a resolution that said anybody who started a chapter of the Klan would get their ass run out of town. Well, there he is saying they were certainly the better of two organizations. In fact, he paints them in a positive light. Today, his statement says they're totally indefensible. What's your view of the White Citizens Council's role in modern Southern history?
Well, I think it's clear, Chris, that the White Citizen Council were no better than Klansmen in a business suit. They intimidated anybody who promoted desegregation. Any kind of integration effort was met with absolute hostility. So the governor's initial response was unfortunate. His opinion of the group does not bear out the facts if you look at them. And I think his stepping back, saying I was wrong, is clearly because he was caught.
You think that's what he thinks?
Well, it's his opinion. But the record does not reflect it. Yazoo City, Mississippi was just like every other small Mississippi town. They resisted any desegregation effort. The federal government had to sue every school district in the state of Mississippi to desegregate. It wasn't because of local leaders. It was because the federal government came to states like Mississippi and said, look, you can't have separate and unequal schools. So my governor's description of Yazoo City, Mississippi during the 60s is totally inaccurate.
Let me go to the Professor Harris Perry. Thanks for joining us, as always. You know, I see something here more nefarious than one person maybe having badly placed nostalgia or even evil nostalgia, if you will, in this case, whatever. Getting back to the general thing, I've noticed a pattern on the right lately. And, of course, we all grew up. I grew up listening to it. I wasn't involved, but the civil rights movement was successful because it said civil rights were more important than states' rights. It came down to that. We Americans honor people's rights, and we find a way to honor them. We don't sit around and talk about states' rights all day as a way of not doing that. And then we dealt in the history books with nullification and secession. Now we're hearing all these words again from Perry, from Cuccinelli in Virginia. Why are the Republicans on the right talking like antebellum Southerners?
You know, Chris, it's an incredibly instructive moment, Barbour's sort of reflection on the idea that the citizens' councils were better than the Klan. And I think we want to pause for just a second and take him at his word there, which is only to say that he's trying to draw a distinction between kind of the horror of physical violence and lynching and this other thing which he sees as somehow more benign. But I think precisely the point that the congressman is making is that it's not more benign, that economic terrorism, political terrorism, social terrorism that the White Citizens Council engaged in was just as profound as lynching, which is to say, you know, they went and actually took people's homes from them for organizing. They made sure that people couldn't go to school if their parents were involved in organizing. They took people's farms and you know, so these were real issues. But part of what happens in this kind of rosy moment is that we look back and we imagine that people just had different opinions and that it wasn't about a fundamental violation not only of civil rights but of human rights. And so it then allows, I think, in this kind of contemporary context, the idea that, well, we disagree with the current pattern of the federal government, and therefore we have a right to stand in massive resistance in opposition to that government. And that only happens because we have such historical forgetfulness about the nature of precisely what these good businessmen councils really were all about.
Well, you're doing a good teaching moment here. Here, let's take a look at something. We have this video. Now, this should be very instructive to a lot of people, including me. Here's a White Citizens Council member back in Birmingham in 1957 who's fighting integration. Let's listen to him in his words.
We're going to have city commissioners in this city of Birmingham, and especially a police commissioner, who will say this to the federal government. Your injunction is of no effect. Your federal law has no effect in the city of Birmingham. We will segregate the buses, and if necessary, I shall arrest every agent of the federal government who attempts to conspire to put across integration.
Wow, Congressman, you remember that kind of voice, I guess.
Well, absolutely. As you know, I live in Mississippi, been there all my life. Those kind of voices I remember as a child, and clearly it was the federal government who stepped in and stopped state governments from discriminating against African Americans.
And so is all this talk about states' rights we're hearing now, nullification, secession, all this babble, is it just another code for we don't like civil rights? Is that what they're talking about, Congressman?
Well, you know, again, somehow people are trying to rewrite history to say that this era in our past was not nearly as bad as people think it is. But clearly you have to talk to people like myself who had to endure separate, unequal, and all of that.
But why are they doing it? Why are they doing it?
Well, I just think it's part of this revisionist theory in history that somehow Southerners didn't do as bad toward African Americans as you think. And I just think that the governor, by stepping back now saying, well, I misspoke, this organization was a bad organization, is because now MSNBC and other stations have taken the cover off of him, and he can't just say these things and continue to be in the public venue.
Professor, is this really a reaction to Barack Obama being president? Would this be going on if McCain were president? This chatter, this clatter of old talk?
Well, I don't think it'd be going on if McCain were president, but it very well might be going on if, say, Hillary Clinton or even John Edwards were president, which is to say it could be about having a Democrat. But let me just say one thing so we're really clear. There are some people right now with this kind of anti-federal government perspective who are doing nothing more than a kind of Confederacy rising again narrative. And it really is about racism and anti-immigrationism and white supremacy. But the fact is they're in a coalition with a bunch of good-hearted Americans who are talking about anti-federal government issues who don't think that. And so what I want to do is I want to speak to that part of the coalition and say the history of America tells you that when you start hearing people talk about this kind of separation, secession, nullification, states' rights, you are aiding and abetting a history of the most ugly kind of violence, the thing that we fought a bloody war against, the thing that we spent 100 years. That is what you are aiding and abetting, even if what you mean is, I want lower taxes. I just want us to be careful about the coalitions in which we find ourselves, because this is what the history of those kinds of states' right narratives really are all about.
You know, I remember back in the 60s growing up, a lot of libertarian kids thought Goldwater was cool, but then all the racists got behind him, and you saw the rebel flags behind it because he voted against civil rights. You know, Congressman, I looked at that poll we had last week at NBC, and I'm proud of our polls because it teaches you stuff if you really look closely at it. There's a portion of the American people who hate Michelle Obama. Now, I can't think of a reason in the world why you would hate this well-turned-out woman who's bringing up her kids well, who's doing nothing more really than fighting childhood obesity and looking out for her family. And if a person hates her, I gotta believe it's race. It's tribal. What do you think? Well, why would you hate Michelle Obama?
There's no question about it. Race is still a problem in this country. Just like some people say the White Citizens Council was a neighborhood watch organization rather than a terrorist organization. So, you know, we have a lot of things like this.
You're a funny guy on a serious matter. Thank you so much. That was a wisecrack, but I love it. They said they were just a neighborhood watch. Thank you for joining us, Congressman. It is always great to have you. And Professor as well. Have you both have a Merry Christmas. Up next, Arlen Specter has some tough talk to talk about his party. He don't like the way the Republican Party's become lately. He left it, of course. He said they're becoming rigid and they moved to the right, and they got no room for moderates like him, obviously. He doesn't like it. He said so today on the Senate floor. Let's look at that in the sideshow. It's coming up next. You're watching Hardball on MSNBC.